OK, rolling. Symphony of the Stones, BBC World Service. Start with the full mix.
I'm Miriam Cooke, and I'm both an archaeologist and a musician. Raise your hands in the air and sing out. In this programme from the BBC World Service, I want to explore the connection between those two sides of me.
OK, stand by to lose sounds.
I want to try and understand what music and sound might have meant to our ancient ancestors.
Remove the musical effects.
To put myself in a world without guitars or keyboards.
Lose the guitars.
To understand how the earliest instruments came into being.
Take out the mandocello. Too modern.
Without recording studios or electronic amplification.
No vocal effects.
And put myself back to a time when my only available instruments would have been my body and my voice.
Lose the voice.
To understand what sounds prehistoric me might have made had I been alive 40,000 years ago.
Kill the beat.
And then to write a song about it. Easy, right? Now, I've got one large disadvantage over other BBC World Service music documentaries, in that there are, obviously, no CDs, records, or MP3s I can play you from prehistoric times. But you will get to hear some of this. A bit of this. Some of this. Strangely, a little of this.
Oh, stop it.
And even some of this. As I attempt to add a little colour and sound to the silent black and white movie of the past. None of what you've just heard might sound particularly musical to our ears. So when we talk about sound and music, what do we really mean?
Sound includes our total acoustic ecology, so the way that we perceive the world by hearing it, as opposed to by using the other senses, by seeing it or feeling it or touching it.
This is Professor Rupert Till from the UK's University of Huddersfield, a musician himself and an expert in archaeoacoustics. We'll come on to that in a minute.
Music's definition is usually organised sound and silence. For me, that also includes the acoustic environment that music is made in, or that those sounds are organised within. If you play a piece of music in a concert hall, it sounds very different than if you play it outdoors or in a cathedral.
Ever since I've been a kid, I've been aware that every empty space has got its own note.
Our environment doesn't just shape the sounds we hear, it shapes the sounds we make.
You can instrumentalise an empty space. It will always sing back the same notes.
Oliver Beer is an artist whose work attempts to reconnect people with their acoustic world.
So when you walk into a staircase, for example, the walls will be reflecting the sound between each other. And according to the distance between the walls, a specific note will come out. And according to the distance between the floor and the ceiling, another note will be reinforced, or another harmonic series, to be more exact. And then every subtle nuance will create its own harmonic. I'll put one of my singers' heads into a corner. So a corner is an amplifier of sound. You lean your head into the corner of your shower or a stairwell, and you whisper a glissando, which is a sliding note. And as you glide very, very slowly through the frequencies, when your voice traverses the resonant frequency or one of the resonant frequencies of this space, the space will start to sing back to you. And that's why it's quite interesting in relationship to prehistoric caves and cave drawings, because when we look at spaces that were inhabited prior to architecture, so caves where we find prehistoric paintings, there's been increasingly a realization that these paintings are concentrated around reverberant spaces. Right now I'm working on a project at the Sydney Opera House. The Opera House has sung the same notes quietly to itself ever since it was completed, and it will continue to sing those notes, and we will be gone. The singers will come and go, music will evolve, but that empty space, this environment, this envelope that we build for ourselves, will continue to indifferently sing its own tune, despite us. If you imagine people going into these caves in the dark, experiencing the empty space with their voices more than with their eyes, it's entirely logical that the resonance, which is such a, it's almost a magical experience to hear your voice transported out of your body. I think it's impossible that they didn't use their architectural spaces in this way. And I think it's something that perhaps we've lost touch with.
I've come to Stonehenge, one of the UK's most celebrated prehistoric sites. It's the day before summer solstice, when thousands of people will come here to mark the longest day of the year. For now, it's very quiet, with just the noise of a nearby road underpinning some birdsong. Susan Greeny is a prehistorian for English Heritage.
Acoustical studies are really interesting because they get the sense of what a monument might have sounded like. And a monument like Stonehenge is obviously in ruins, so there are lots of stones fallen down, quite a number of stones are missing. And so what archaeologists can do now is use technology in order to recreate what that would have looked like and then test what it would have sounded like. So we've got lots of people thinking about how, if there was drumming in here, or what kind of ceremonies could have taken place, what does it sound like if you sing in a space like this?
It's quite interesting, isn't it, to think of the ceremonies, because ceremonies that we imagine and we know from anthropological studies would have sound and drums, and so I imagine that tomorrow when we're coming up towards the monument, we're going to be hearing a lot of drumming, because tomorrow we have a lot of people arriving.
Yeah. It will sound quite distinctive. You'll hear it from a distance, and then as you come into the stone circle space, you'll hear drumming or people playing guitars or singing or chanting. So it's quite an interesting way of if you're thinking acoustically, or how does this sound if I move around the space? How does it sound if I stand over here and listen from this distance? And that's a really interesting thing to try and do. And actually, tomorrow will be a really good. It's probably as close as you can get to what actually went on here in prehistory without any further knowledge. I mean, people gathering, people drumming, people using their voices, people having ceremonies, and that's the kind of thing that we think was going on here in prehistory.
As I'm talking to Susan, Rupert is busy setting up the equipment he'll use to test the acoustics of the stone circle.
I'm getting out a DPA omnidirectional microphone. It just captures the sound exactly as it is here. We'll put a signal out, a sine wave test signal, through a loudspeaker, which we've calibrated in an anechoic chamber. So when you take away the test sound, what you're left it with is the sound of the space, so the sound of Stonehenge. So it leaves you with the kind of acoustic fingerprint of Stonehenge, which you can then study and use in lots of different interesting ways.
This is archaeoacoustics, the study of sound within archaeological contexts. Rupert has analysed Stonehenge before and has used his data to create an app. It allows the user to immerse themselves in the different natural sounds we believe would have been heard here across thousands of years. We might not always notice natural sounds like birds, wind or rain, but 4,500 years ago, their effect would have been powerful.
If the wind was blowing in here really hard, it could make the air vibrate as if it was being contained in a big sort of drum of air, a very large drum of air. If you hit a drum skin, the drum underneath is a sort of a round body of air that amplifies the sound of you hitting the skin of the drum with a stick. And similarly here, if the wind was blowing really quite hard, then it can make Stonehenge vibrate, a bit like running your finger around a giant wine glass or something. It makes this body of air resonate, this circular container of resonant material ring.
When we return shortly before sunrise the following morning, the site has a very different soundtrack. The stone circle is crammed with people using their bodies and voices to clap, drum and chant, and it's easy to imagine this happening at any time in Stonehenge's long history. But for some visitors, like Stuart, something profound is happening here.
We do this mantra, we call the word, and we done it on an equinox in the centre of Stonehenge, and the stone started to sing, but it only works with a certain tone. I'll give you a rough example. It goes, you hit that tone that your whole skeleton vibrates, then the stones vibrate and they sing to you.
What do you think about what Stuart was saying about the stones ringing with the sounds of the mantra?
It's interesting. I mean, if you've got enough people in a space and you make a powerful enough noise of the right kind, you can kind of activate an acoustic. If they're chanting a low note, they're moving quite a lot of air, and it may be when they get to certain notes in their mantra, it sets off some resonances in the space. And that can have quite a weird effect. It sounds really odd, it sounds really strange in your ears. So it's possible that what they're doing is they're kind of activating a distance between two of the stones, like the diameter of the stones. Like the air's being trapped between those stones and there's the sounds bouncing backwards and forwards between them. So it sounds like that's the sort of thing they're hearing. And you do get those sort of effects in a structure like Stonehenge.
We might have our own personal interpretations of what sounds feel primal or inherently natural to us. But to better understand the sound of prehistory, we need something more rigorous. What archaeoacoustics is concerned with is finding reliable, repeatable evidence to help us understand a site's acoustic fingerprint. Rupert and I have driven a short distance to West Kennet, a Neolithic burial mound dating back 5,500 years. And Rupert's got his equipment out.
Oh, stop it. Right, so I need to make a playlist with lots of times.
By playing certain tones through a loudspeaker, we can create an intriguing effect on the sound within the burial mound. But before we hear it, an experiment. See if you can hum or chant along to this. This tone has a frequency of 110 Hertz. It's the same as playing this A on a piano. And when a tone of 110 or 111 Hertz is played in this ancient burial mound, it resonates and it creates what are known as standing waves.
So we're playing a sine wave at 111 Hertz and it's set the space into resonance. So it's a bit like if you twang a string, it moves in particular ways. The air in here is being forced to vibrate in particular ways. So when you're next to the wall, the air moves as little as it can. As you slowly walk out, we get to the first kind of point where the chamber at the back of the building is kind of shut off by some big stones, and then there's a maximum that's kind of making it vibrate there, or it's lined up to vibrate there. So the weird thing is, when you walk away from the speaker, the sound actually gets louder.
And here it's really loud again. It's really loud. I mean, we're coming close to the speaker. My God, that's ridiculously loud. Outside, we meet Paul Devereux, who's been researching archaeoacoustics for over 20 years.
So we went around, this was about 1995, and we went around a set of passage graves, stone-chambered monuments of the Neolithic era. And we went around and we found we were getting a resonant pattern inside the chambers that focused on 110 Hertz. And we ended up at Newgrange in Ireland, which the chamber is fairly original. And we get perfect 110 Hertz primary resonance. And 110 Hertz, 111, 112 Hertz, that range is lower bass, lower A. And so anybody chanting in a lower bass sound will produce sound waves, standing waves inside those enclosures. You see, we've been looking at archaeological sites as if it was a silent movie, and this gave it a soundtrack. Suddenly we could find out more, get more information from these places by listening as well as looking and measuring and digging and all the rest of it.
It's not just this one low note that resonates here, and it's not the same note everywhere. As our sound artist Oliver said earlier, every space has its own set of frequencies that will bring that space to life. We can't know if Neolithic visitors to West Kennet chanted, or if they did, what they might have chanted. But archaeoacoustics can help us to be more certain of what sounds would have had the most impact, and also which parts of a site might have been best suited to noise-making or to quieter activities. This ties in with a theory about how prehistoric art might have evolved not simply by people painting in the best parts of a site visually, but also sonically. We'll come on to that later, but first...
It's important for history and for culture to be able to say, what was it like to be there?
Chris Kyriakakis runs a sound company in Los Angeles called Odyssey.
It becomes a transforming experience. You start to believe that you're traveling in time, and I think that's a very powerful notion.
In 2014, he returned to his hometown of Thessaloniki in Greece to study the acoustics of its Byzantine churches.
We recorded 8 churches in Thessaloniki, ranging from the 5th century all the way to the 14th century.
His aim was to help track the way the architecture of these buildings had developed with the evolution of ritual chants.
Did the change in architecture that happened in around the 8th century have an effect on the way chant evolved around the same time? The people that built those churches definitely had some acoustic considerations. I'll give you an example. In one of the churches, it's called the Hieropitos. It's a very large church, rectangular in shape. The common people were not allowed to sit in the center of the church. They were seated on the aisles. And there were very large marble walls that didn't allow them to see what was happening in the middle. I guess the VIPs of the time were only allowed to sit there. But the clergy and the chanters would then go and stand on what's called an ambo, which is basically a little small stage, which allowed their voice to carry very well over those barriers and still be able to sing in both spaces. It was just a very interesting example where they knew that those barriers were clearly muffling their voice and it wouldn't be heard. There were some big differences that corresponded to some of the changes in architecture. Some of the churches that were more like basilicas that had a more traditional V-shaped roof had very, very different acoustics than the churches that had domes. The domes had a very big effect on the reflection patterns and reverberation, and it was very audible. It was also very noticeable to the chanters, whom I think they've all sung in those churches before, but not in consecutive days, and so the comparisons were very dramatic to them, and I think that helped us put together this notion that they were changing their style based on the church. We still have a lot more work to do to prove that, but I think that was one of the things that we noticed, is that the acoustics definitely had an effect.
This is where I think archaeoacoustics can help us all connect better with the past. Imagine being able to visit a prehistoric site, putting on some headphones, and instead of hearing a simple audio guide, hearing accurate recreations of the sounds our ancestors might have experienced.
For me, the dream would be to walk into a site that maybe has lost some of its elements due to time and be able to recreate a performance there, whatever it might be, religious, it might be a sporting event in the Colosseum of Rome, it doesn't matter. But to be able to recreate it, I think that would be a very cool thing to have.
My interest in ancient sound started 12 years ago when I visited a cave in Andalusia in southern Spain called Cueva de la Pileta. There's evidence of people living here between 40,000 and 4,000 years ago, and it's pretty much untouched, as they only let a small handful of people in at any one time. This is where I first discovered lithophones. These are rocks that naturally ring with sound when struck. So I've come back with Rupert.
We're in this incredibly large cavern here. It's spectacular, really. All of the stalagmites and stalactites are... This place has got to be, 30 metres high? How high is it? 30 metres high. It's really massive. And you can hear the acoustics already. You can hear it in my voice. It's echoing. You don't think that if you're going to hit a rock that it's going to ring with sound, but here it does.
You've got different notes. Lower and higher notes. I'm not the best drummer in the world. So these are about 7 or 8 meters high. And how long would it take for these to form?
1 centímetro 100 años.
So 1 centimetre for every 100 years. So that thousands.
Yes.
Thousands of years to create these. I guess you'd call it a percussion instrument, like a xylophone. I think it would be better if you had a go, Rupert, because at least you can play these things.
We put reverberation in the recording studio on things to make them sound nicer. I do that all the time in the studio, and here the cave just does it for you.
That reverberation would also have made prehistoric instruments sound entirely different inside the cave from outside. It would have transformed them from this to this. This is a bull roarer, a piece of wood attached to a cord, then swung. And it's an instrument found throughout prehistory, right around the world.
It's very different to any of the other sounds we're making. It doesn't sound like a voice or a drum or a flute. And yet we know that this is a sound people made. And it makes sense in this space. Because most of the time you hear echoes and they're kind of quite high frequency, but this makes this alien noise, and we see all these pictures of bulls and who make these low kind of noises, and we see abstract, strange shapes and spaces, and it's quite an alien space down here, so an alien sound seems to kind of work.
There are dozens of examples of prehistoric rock art here, and later we'll hear more about how these early paintings are often found in the parts of a site with the most impressive sound responses. Next, we'll hear about the power of the voice, how instruments helped in the evolution of music, and how music helps us recapture our past. I'm Miriam Cooke, and you're listening to Symphony of the Stones on the BBC World Service. I'm attempting to understand the sound and the music that our ancient ancestors would have heard and made, and to write a song about it. John Hughes is a sound artist, and earlier this year he created a unique work for the prehistoric site in England called Creswell Crags.
Creswell Crags is a limestone gorge on the border of Nottinghamshire and Derbyshire, and there's water running down the middle of it and caves on either side. And a lot of important things have been found in those caves over the years since it was first discovered as an archaeological site in the late 19th century. For example, lots of remains of animals going back over 100,000 years, and also it has a really rich human habitation history that goes back right the way back to over 50,000 years to Neanderthal man. And most famously probably it's the site of the only known Stone Age rock art in the UK, so it's a really important site. In such a culture, if you hear extraordinary sound of red deer, like rutting deer or herds of red deer in the distance, and those sounds are moving through the air, I mean, without a scientific explanation of what sound is, what do you think that sound is? For people then, the sound of thunder was the sound of an angry god. That's just what it was. The music we made wasn't an attempt to create a kind of imagined reconstruction of the kinds of music that people might have had back then. Instead of that, it was an original composition made to catch the long-term biography of the Creswell Crags, a kind of collage. We used sounds of rock. We managed to get hold of some sounds of glacial melt recordings recorded underwater, i.e. recorded my own sounds of the environment and sounds of water. And we also used oral history archives from mining archives and my own interviews with people I met on the site as well, local people. So we used a really wide range of sound sources for the project. Music and sound becomes a kind of sonic library for our culture and our race's past experience, our species' past experience. I think that a listener can understand the past better through the use of music, and I think music and the past interrelate. It can communicate some of the qualities of a landscape, including, depth of time and the incredible distance of time that you have in a landscape like Creswell. It goes back 260 million years to the formation of the landscape. And that's something that we often, in day-to-day life, we often overlook or find difficult to articulate. Sound, music does that well, I think.
We can't know or prove what sounds or music our ancestors made, but Dr. Ian Morley from the UK's University of Oxford tells me that we shouldn't think of them as being that different from ourselves.
We are physically the same as the Homo sapiens that came into Europe 40,000 years ago, that evolved in Africa at least 200,000 years ago. Physiologically, we're essentially biologically identical. Mentally, from around 150 to 200,000 years ago, our brains are the same as those of other humans at that time. And so our experience of sound and our experience of the production of sound, producing it ourselves, is likely to be very, very similar.
Ian's the author of a book called The Prehistory of Music. I ask him what the essential elements of music would be then and now.
Sometimes those elements that are definitive of music can be quite surprising, I think. It's not necessarily the fact that you've got a variety of pitches. It's not necessarily the fact that you've got a rhythm, which are the first things that people would usually think of. There are ways that sounds that we wouldn't necessarily call musical could be made musical. Hammering a nail into a wall is rhythmic and it's deliberate, but it's not necessarily music, unless someone intends it to be music or unless someone intends it to be perceived as music. So one of the important things is intention, and an absolutely essential element of music that it's very easy to forget is that music production can't happen without the use of the body. Our bodies are actually fantastic instruments. It's a bit of a mystery why anyone would bother to create instruments.
And yet we did start creating instruments. Professor Rupert Till again.
So the first time we know people were making something that we would recognise as music today is using these bird-bone pipes or flutes, which are 40,000 or so years ago, made of vulture bone, which is a nice big bird bone, which is naturally hollow. So you make some finger holes and you've got a flute, basically. It's not quite as simple as that, but at that point we know that people are intentionally making music. They're not making some noises while they're working, they're not, turning rhythms of running into a kind of percussion sound. We know people are playing musical instruments that have been created on purpose to be musical instruments, and we have a sense of positive musical creative agency.
So this little piece of bamboo is a recorder or a flute or a pipe. All of those words are used to describe these things. They can make nice noises. I can't promise to do anything nice with it particularly. It's very simple to make. It's a hollow piece of bamboo tube. We didn't have bamboo in Europe in the Paleolithic, but we did have other things like elder, and the bark of and the outer surface of elder can be turned into a pipe a bit like this. But again, this is something that wouldn't preserve archaeologically, but it can make sounds that go a bit beyond what you can make with the body, even though the human voice is really, really versatile. And then these are so small that they're not very easy to play. You can actually get chords on there because you can play more than one of them at a time. Those are the panpipes.
These early instruments like pipes, flutes, drums, rattles and scrapers crop up around the world in various guises. And it's easy for us to link them with how we understand music today. But the notion of intentionally producing sound, whether that's with the voice, with instruments, or with a combination, is what interests me most. What is it deep within the human psyche that makes it so important to us?
All different kinds of human societies have music, and all different kinds of human societies have religion of some kind and ritual of some kind. Not all music is part of ritual, and not all ritual and religion includes music, but they very, very frequently coincide with each other. And there are reasons why music is very, very effective at influencing ritual or being perceived to influence ritual, because of the influences that it has on emotional state and on a sense of group identity and shared experience with the other people who are around you. Very frequently, in fact usually, ritual is viewed as something that exists in order to have some sort of transforming role, to change the world or to change events from one kind of state into another kind of state. And very often music is attributed with that ability as well, partly because of the effects that it has on people, that actually if you make music, then it has effects on changing the world. And a lot of creation myths actually incorporate that. This concept of transforming people and transforming relationships and transforming the world really tie music and ritual together in all sorts of ways.
That connection between music and ritual is interesting. And the next people we'll hear from have music at the very heart of their culture. I'm here in the hot deserts of Southern California at the Morongo Native American Reservation, where amongst other tribes are the Cahuilla tribe. And I'm here to learn about the voice and how the voice is used in song, in their myths, and generally how it's used as an instrument. Walter Holmes and Ernest Sieber are from the Cahuilla tribe of American Indians. Their mythology tells of them being brought to earth from the heavenly realm of Marda and their search for a home. And this is celebrated in a series of short musical elements known as bird songs.
We have songs for everything, just about animals, the water, the sea, the trees, the rivers, the sun, the moon, the stars, all these came in order. All these songs, you sing them in order, it tells a story of the journey that we took.
Most of the songs have just one statement and it's repeated. To me, that's key because it's a way of keeping it safe. It's like a shorthand. If you know those words and the story, you know the song, then you know the story, and vice versa. If you can think of the word, then the song will come to you.
I've asked Walter to teach me one of his songs. It's called Bowama, and it's about gathering together as one to celebrate.
Bowama, Bowama, oh, oh, oh. So when you start, it's Bowama,
Bowama, Bowama, See, when you start...
I'm starting on the higher bit.
Yeah. When you say Bowama, Bowama, then you go Bowama, 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 you go up a little high. You go a little high, and as you go like this. You go like this, and you go up, and you go down. You go up, and then the third one, then you go up.
Yeah, I'm just not going to get that.
These songs are deceptively simple. They might only have one or two phrases each and convey one highly specific idea, in this case, the simple act of gathering together. But the music lifts and falls very subtly. And there are hundreds of them, which add up to tell the story of their people.
Yes, it's quite, when you sing it, I guess it's quite easy to get into a kind of a trance.
Yeah.
Because it's quite,
Yeah. You feel it coming. You feel it coming out. That it grasps you real quick, Most of all the songs are like that. Once you get to know them, you grasp it, and it flows. Then it flows.
Yeah, you get into it. Yeah. You get quite into the actual singing, and it becomes almost like a meditative thing. How am I doing?
Yeah, you get there.
Yeah, another 20 years.
Yeah, because listen to the song, you got to make the song go in rhythm. Sometimes you sing a song, you can sing it, I'll be playing, and it doesn't sound right. Yeah. But once you get the hold of it, you just make it like a melody, and it comes out to be a beautiful song. Yeah.
But I guess I'll get there in 20 years. I'll be there.
20 years to get there, right. Took me that long, though.
These bird songs clearly aren't prehistoric. They're part of an active oral history. But for that to continue, people need to keep remembering or recording them for future generations.
There are so many songs that were used in our culture that are not used anymore because our ways of living have changed. We had many ceremonies that were used for different parts of life and the world, which, when the ceremonies ceased to be practiced, then the songs also were not sung anymore. And so that's why we don't have those songs.
So these little songs are part of a bigger picture. They all work together, and the whole idea is passing on of knowledge, of life, of seasons, of processing, of agriculture, of what's growing, of how to process, what to pick, what plants are out there. It's all been passed along through song. So this is a wonderful method of passing along information, and it's very interesting to think that this was probably how it was done for thousands of years.
Throughout this programme, I've been trying to learn about the sound of prehistory, with the aim of performing some kind of song, a piece of music that connects me to the past. For the final part of my quest, I'd like you to meet Stephen Waller. He's brought me to a place called
Little Black Mountain,
which has a particularly fine
echo.
Stephen's interest is in the relationship between where rock art is found and the acoustics of those places.
So where are we going then, Steve? What is this place, this rock?
This is Little Black Mountain in Arizona, and it's a big butte that has a lot of large boulders at the bottom, and the boulders are basically covered with petroglyphs, and you can hear an echo coming from the boulders as well as from the top of the butte.
A petroglyph is an image made from cutting or scratching into rock.
Echo!
Oh, it's very pronounced, isn't it?
Yes.
Given that we're outside, the echo is remarkable. But with 500 petroglyphs decorating the mountain and its surrounding rocks, you can understand why most visitors focus on what they see rather than what they can hear.
People are doing like what we're doing. They go right up to it and take pictures and wonder, what does this mean? And try to analyze the imagery and almost try to read it as if it's writing or hieroglyphics or something.
Yeah.
And there's been limited success. Some of them are interpreted as sun designs and things like that. There's cloud imagery.
There's obviously animal imagery as well.
Yes, yeah. But very few people, if anybody, I'm probably one of the few, stop to think that sound might be important. The thing that's special about this place is not only that there are thousands of petroglyphs here, but the acoustics, the soundscape of this environment is incredible because of the very strong echoes that come off of the cliff faces.
And this is a site that's obviously been used over a long period of time, from about 8,000 years ago, I think it says on the information. An important place then.
Yes, I think it would have drawn the people here because they would have considered the echoes to be a supernatural, mysterious phenomenon. Because we understand today that sound is simply waves of pressure in the air that reflect off the surfaces and form an echo. But the ancient people didn't know about sound waves, and their explanation for echoes was that they were spirits that lived in the rocks and called out to passers-by. And it's actually a similar belief to what we would now call a virtual sound source on the other side of the reflecting surface. Just how you look in a mirror, you look in the mirror because it gives the illusion of depth. And as if there's a virtual you on the other side of the reflecting glass. But here at a rock art site, where there's these stone surfaces that reflect sound, it gives the same illusion of depth, that there's another you on the other side of the rock calling back to you.
Stephen's belief is not only that these forms of rock art are found where sound is at its most impressive or intimate, but that the sounds you'd hear there might directly lead to what the prehistoric artists chose to depict.
Like at this place where we are now, that have the sheep depicted, when you clap, you can hear hoofbeat like echoes. So they would have probably perceived it as sheep in the rock, invisible sheep that would have been mysterious. And there are actually Native American myths that describe echo spirits hiding in the bellies of sheep, and also in snake skins, and lizards who call back in the form of an echo. So there's a lot of mythology. A lot of people know about the Greek echo myth, but there are actually many, many echoes that I've collected all around the world, dozens and dozens of myths that describe the belief that echoes are spirits that dwell in the rocks and call back. And there are other legends that say that people hear the sounds of deer in the rock. Echo! That would explain why they would go deep in the cave, because they were seeking the spirits and only paint certain chambers, the chambers with the loudest echoes. So ever since then, and that's been 30 years now, I've been going to as many rock art sites as I can around the world and doing acoustic measurements to test my hypothesis that the rock art was motivated by sound. So the hypothesis is that the rock art would be located at the places with the strongest echoes. So I do quantitative measurements, and what I've found so far is that there's a really good correlation between the places that are decorated and the places with the strongest echoes.
This, by the way, ties in with the art we saw in our Spanish cave. A lot of it was hard to reach or even see. Some of the paintings were really tucked away, but often in small parts of the cave where our voices resonated with ease.
Stand, stretch, walk tall, running, catching breath.
Nice. That's great, yeah. So, see, this is an example where the environment is influencing the music.
Yes.
This especially. Listen to the songs of the earth. So maybe pause after listen. Listen!
Listen to song of the earth.
Yeah.
I think the interesting thing is that the place here is affecting how I'm singing, which is the whole point of this program, is to be influenced by what you would think it would be like to sing or create some sound thousands of years ago. And obviously, if singing in a certain way is going to create a certain echo, then you're going to pronounce that. You're going to do it more. So the way I was singing this song maybe last night in my room would be very different to how I'm going to sing it today. It may not be as melodic, it may not be as beautifully refined, but it will work better with the echoes. And that's the whole point of, I guess, if you were singing in these environments, was to take advantage of the natural acoustics.
As I was making this programme, I made notes of what the prehistoric musician inside me and the musician that I am now might have in common. I've tried, thanks to Rupert, to be more aware of my environment and the natural sounds surrounding me. I've wanted to include other people, so Steve's going to help me. As Ian suggested, I want to put my emotion, my gestures, my body into the song. I want my song, like Ernest and Walter's bird songs, to be repetitive and to tell a story. The song I ended up writing is called Songs of the Earth.
River rides with biting wind, churning gives birth to the sea. Howling, swirling, tearing stones, forcing new land to be free. Crawl, climb, creep, fall, stand, stretch, walk tall, running, catching breath. Groan, roar, shout, sing, twisting, shape, shifting, fighting, cheating, death. 100,000 years or more, writhing across the mortal floor, sharing knowledge, seeking sage, slowly builds the human stage. Life giving birth, time in reverse, listen to songs of the earth. Life giving birth, time in reverse, listen to songs of the earth. Fish of ochre, black and grey, dust rising, hooves thundering through, screams of pain as arrows sail, blood pouring, life flowing too. Crawl, climb, creep, fall, stand, stretch, walk tall, running, catching breath. Groan, roar, shout, sing, twisting, shape, shifting, fighting, cheating, death. 100,000 years or more, writhing across the mortal floor, sharing knowledge, seeking sage, slowly builds the human stage. Life giving birth, time in reverse, listen to songs of the earth. Life giving birth, time in reverse, listen to songs of the earth. Pounding drums and rattling bones, fire twisting head, chanting low. Voices join and rise and fall. Two parts combine, new life grows. Crawl, climb, creep, fall, stand, stretch, walk tall, running, catching breath. Grow, shout, roar, sing, twisting, shape, shifting, fighting, cheating, death. 100,000 years or more, writhing across the mortal floor, sharing knowledge, seeking sage, slowly builds the human stage. Life giving birth, time in reverse, listen to songs of the earth. Life giving birth, time in reverse, listen to songs of the earth.
Symphony of the Stones was presented by me, Miriam Cooke, and is a Wise Buddha production for BBC World Service.
Thank you very much. Yes, thank you. You're very kind. The spirits like me.